After exploring why the Tau Empire and the Covenant would be enemies, it's only fair to consider the relation between the UNSC, or rather the United Earth Government, and the Tau Empire. Both are underdogs of their respective universes. Both withstood aggression from a far more powerful faction, and both can be considered to be rational, more or less. Originally, I wanted to go through multiple scenarios of potential alliances in detail, but that would make this video far longer than it needs to be and kinda dance around the subject. So I will get into the core of my arguments first and then skim the surface of a few scenarios for your enjoyment. But before we begin, remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole shtick. You know what to do. If you can, support me on Patreon, where you can get access to a lot of additional content. With that out of the way, let's get to it. Let's start with the most fundamental reason why the alliance between those two factions is even a possibility. They aren't fundamentally opposed to one another. And that might sound like a silly thing to mention first, but is it really? By all accounts, humanity could join the Covenant. Hell, they wanted to surrender to them after suffering a number of defeats at the start of the war. They tried to use diplomacy when dealing with brutes, for crying out loud, so it's not like there was no attempt at peaceful coexistence. But that didn't happen because this was a war of extermination, not conquest or subjugation. Diplomacy wasn't an option. In the same way as I explained in the previous video, the Tau Empire and the Covenant would be enemies because their ideologies are fundamentally opposed to one another. They are too different from each other to become allies. But in case of the United Earth Government and the Tau Empire, there are no fundamental barriers to diplomatic talks. The UEG isn't a xenophobic state, nor one set on blind expansion or extermination of hostile life. The UEG is without a doubt an authoritarian and militaristic state, one that uses force to suppress opposition instead of other solutions, but compared to factions the Tau Empire encountered, they are quite tame. Most importantly, both factions are pragmatic and focus on unity. They have different ways of accomplishing their goals, but overall, there are many core similarities between them. If you watched my video on why the Tau Empire and the Covenant would be enemies, you remember how I pointed out that while both factions look similar on the surface, at their core they are drastically different from one another, to the point of unavoidable hostility. In this case, the situation is different. On the outside, the UEG and the Tau Empire are very different from one another. But at their core, they are very similar and want, generally, the same thing: survival, prosperity, security, and expansion of their civilization. And while this could lead to conflict, there is far greater chance for them to choose the diplomatic option. And that's mostly because war isn't the optimal solution for either side. The UEG is far bigger than the Tau Empire. Officially, humanity in Halo possessed something around 800 worlds before the Human Covenant War. Depending on the period we talk about, the Tau Empire could possess as little as 100 or as many as 500 worlds. Some sources propose as many as 1000 worlds in the late stages of the 41st millennium, but I don't really take them seriously. Let's make it sound somewhat reasonable and say that humans would control between 2 to 3 times more worlds than the Tau Empire. That's a gigantic difference. Any war of conquest from the Tau perspective would take too long and be too costly. And I'm not talking about speed of Tau FTL, which is far slower than slip space. Hell, even if they had slip space on the level of a Covenant, it would take too long. Why? Because Tau don't glass planets and move on. They conquer, secure, and integrate them. The Human Covenant War lasted 28 years, and in this case, the Covenant wasn't bothering with conquering worlds. They just glassed them from orbit and moved on. The Tau would put boots on the ground to conquer, secure, and integrate the planet into their empire, and that means far greater dedication of time and resources than the extermination campaign of the Covenant. So, war of conquest is not feasible. They could potentially try an overwhelming strike, making the UNSC believe they don't stand a chance, forcing them into a surrender, but that's one hell of a gamble, and I don't think the Tau would risk it. So the Tau wouldn't choose war as an option, because of their ideology and because it's not a practical solution here. In case of UNSC, war against the Tau isn't an option either. Because while they possess more worlds, the Tau Empire has superior technology, a larger population, a stronger economy, is far more internally stable, and have mightier military. Some of you might be surprised by this, but despite what many 40k fans claim, the Tau Empire is quite a strong faction. They wouldn't survive in the grim dark future if they weren't. Let me give you a single example that will convince you that I'm not talking out of my ass. In the Tau Empire, there is a major sept-world of Satsia. Satsia has a population counted in trillions. Not millions. Not billions. Trillions. Not singular trillion. Plural. Trillions. With that in mind, that planet alone has more population than the entire UEG. I'm not even going into the potential industrial output of that one world. If we assume that Satsia has only 2 trillion people, the lowest we can expect, and say that only 0.5% of the population serves in military, that's 10 billion souls. That's the equivalent of the entire population of Earth in Halo. So yeah, in this comparison, size isn't as important as you might think. Additionally, the Tau have proven to be superior defensive faction. They did stop multiple Orc Wargs, Imperial Crusades, and even Tyranid incursions. I'm not even going into the giant gap between the tech level of both factions. I don't believe the UNSC could conquer even half a dozen of Tau planets without leaving their own territories totally exposed for potential counterattack. Not to mention the problem with insurrectionists that would most likely oppose any aggressive war against the Tau. The UEG isn't internally stable enough to start an offensive war. Just like the Covenant fell apart, in part because the war against humanity strained the fragile structure of their society, the same way the UEG would fall apart because of anti-Earth movements rising in the opposition to this war. That's why even a Cold War scenario isn't that compelling, because it basically gives a free win to the Tau. For all the skill and talent within the Oni, they aren't ready to handle the genius and schemes of a water caste. If there is someone who could outplay them at their own game, it's them. A Cold War scenario basically ensures that UEG would fall apart or split into multiple warring states, with some of them willingly joining the Tau Empire, giving the Tau access to the majority of intelligence and technology they could gain through diplomatic means. And interestingly enough, a Cold War scenario can only happen if the Oni starts this conflict. The Tau are patient and would be ready to give decades, entire generations, to convince the UEG to willingly become their partners. They patiently influence individual worlds for years upon years, decade after decade, before officially making them join their empire. They wouldn't jump the gun while dealing with the UEG. The price is too big for that. Not to mention that a human civil war wouldn't be in the interest of a Tau Empire. Why take a piece of a pie if you can have the entire bakery? So, a Cold War could only start if the Oni would decide to start it, and would be a war they would lose. Hopefully, there would be someone smart enough within their ranks to point that out and stop them from making a really dumb decision. So, I explained why an alliance is possible between the two factions, and why both will be more or less forced to use diplomacy, because war, including a cold one, wouldn't be a reasonable solution. With all that in mind, let's get to why they would be great allies. First, their technology complements one another. While overall weaker on the technological front, the humans from Halo have massive advantage over the Tau, the slip space drive being a major example. This technology alone would convince the Tau to establish a proper alliance with the UEG, and they would pay a lot to get their hands on it. And the UEG would need to provide it relatively quickly, because, again, they aren't a united force. There are rogue elements, so if UEG doesn't provide the tech to the Tau, insurrectionists will. The Tau could potentially risk an open war with the UEG if it meant getting their hands on that tech, in exchange for supporting one of the insurrectionists' factions. So the UEG would be forced to sell this technology, and the best price for it is a proper alliance and some of the Tau technology. The terraforming and manufacturing genius of the Earth caste in exchange for the slip space drive will be a good deal for humanity. I fully expect a similar relation to that of the Tau Empire and the Leagues of Votan, where they are, for the most part, in a mercantile alliance, which would be ideal for both sides. A bit of a controversial take, but I think that human artificial intelligence is in some aspects superior to that of Tau AI, but it's weaker in others. If both factions work together on a project of creating such an artificial construct, it will be something far beyond either faction ever could hope to create. There is also the subject of a UNSC successfully creating superhumans in the form of Spartans. Compared to the Space Marines, Spartans are far more feasible super soldiers, something the Tau Empire could recreate in their own population. Finally, humans as reclaimers of the Forerunners could use some tech support from the Tau. I've made an entire video on why the Earth caste, the scientists and engineers of the Tau, scare me. If there is a group of people who could help with figuring out Forerunner tech and accessing its secrets relatively quickly, it would be the Earth caste. For all the genius and intelligence of the Forerunners, they didn't leave proper instructions or AI that didn't go completely mad during the millennia since they erased all intelligent life from the galaxy. So, the Earth caste would prove beyond useful in this regard. Not to mention the general caution Tau have with dealing with alien technology. The probability of the Tau releasing the flood from its containment by accident is rather minimal, as they wouldn't approach Forerunner installations wielding a sledgehammer. Next is the benefit for both sides if they work together in terms of resources. The UEG controls a larger territory and has a potential to access more resources. But the Tau have the technology and experience of accessing them. Resources that humanity didn't even try to touch because of technological limitations. The cooperation on resource extraction and industrial production would make both factions significantly more powerful. Next, a bit of an unusual take. I think the Tau would be able to calm down the insurrectionist movement within the UEG peacefully. The Iron Fist way of doing things only escalated bloodshed and showed cracks in the Earth regime. Though it would be long-term, the Water caste would be able to smooth out the edges and ensure that the great fear for human leadership and the Oni, the fracturing of human civilization and any subsequent fall, wouldn't happen. If there is someone who can ensure unity and stability within human space, it's the Water caste. And now we get to what you all been waiting for. Potential military alliance against the Covenant. I already explained why the Tau would support humanity during the Human Covenant War in the previous video, so let's get into how working together against this common foe would show the true potential of this alliance. First and foremost, the UNSC would benefit greatly from not only the Tau military presence on the ground and in the void, but also because their troops would get serious upgrades with access to Tau weaponry and armor. Spartans alone would become several times more deadly if they got access to the Tau equipment. While Mjolnir armor is very impressive even by Earth caste standards, weapons given to those super soldiers left a lot to be desired. The Tau can fill up that gap with relative ease, providing those super soldiers with pulse rifles, ion rifles, and even rail rifles, not to mention drone support and other gadgets. The ODST could be no small source of inspiration for the Tau, who could ask for human trainers and UNSC expertise regarding creation of their own variant of such unit. Hell Jumpers themselves, boosted with the Tau weaponry and support systems, would prove even deadlier than they were already. In the Void, the Tau could help figure out how to give UNSC ships goddamn shields, because good lord, they need those. Not to mention, Tau fleets on their own could put up a fight against the Covenant. UNSC ships and the Tau Navy, working in tandem, could sink all Covenant vessels that would get close. The Tau fleets would be most likely smaller in number, but generally the majority of their vessels would be greater in size compared to standard Covenant warships. Though some lore bits imply that the Tau Empire could deploy both numerically superior and stronger fleets than the Covenant. but I think that's a subject for a video on its own. Tau have amazing sensors and detection systems, even by 40K standards. No Covenant fleet will be able to sneak up to a planet which has Tau-made detection systems. Additionally, both the range and accuracy of UNSC guns could be extended with those systems in place, making them even more deadly to the Covenant. Not to mention energy shields that can protect cities, continents, maybe even planets as a whole. Anti-orbital cannons and missile launchers, orbital defense stations, and so on. The UNSC, with a number of worlds, could provide an abundance of resources for the Tau Empire industry to fuel the war machine against the Covenant. And Spartans could accomplish missions that even the Empire's special forces would struggle to accomplish. When the Human-Covenant War was marked with loss after loss for humanity, with the Tau on their side, those two factions could not only stop the Covenant, but even attempt to push back. It wouldn't be easy, in fact it would be still a hard fight, but together they would stand more than a fair chance of fighting back and scoring a victory. Or, more likely, cause more friction within the Covenant hierarchy, leading to a quicker dissolution of that alliance. In this scenario, both sides complement each other's strengths, and working together, they could exploit major weaknesses of the Covenant to a far greater degree than when humanity tried to do it alone. I might get into potential war scenarios in the future, but now, after everything I said, let me give you a few small alliance scenarios, how they would come to pass. I will be brief as to not prolong this video. First, an easy example, with the UNSC getting transported into the Warhammer 40K universe. I hope I don't need to explain to anyone why the UNSC would need allies and why the Tau would be their best bet. The blueberries would be their only real hope to survive and retain some measure of autonomy at the same time. Not to mention that the Tau would welcome them with open arms the moment they find out about the slipspace drive. As I said before, that alone guarantees an alliance. Next scenario. The Tau Empire gets transported into the Halo universe during or before the Human-Covenant War. And that scenario was basically explained above. Because the Covenant and the Tau Empire would be enemies, the Tau and the UNSC would become allies out of circumstance, only to become true allies because of shared struggle against the Covenant and significant benefits from the deepening of the alliance. Now, I am tempted to discuss a scenario where the Tau show up in a post-Human-Covenant War, but Halo lore gets a bit wacky and chaotic with what happened during that post-war period, with many plotlines left unfinished to this day. So forgive me, but I'm not touching that. That period is so chaotic that I honestly think that the Tau would either do their best to stay out of it until the situation resolves itself, maybe grab a few slices of pie here and there, or attempt to stabilize the situation on their own and bring some measure of order into that region of the galaxy. Finally, the most fun scenario. The Tau Empire replacing the Covenant in the Halo universe. This scenario alone might deserve a video on its own, because despite everything I said before about potential cooperation and the value of it between the two factions, we can't forget the elephant in the room. The Oni. I don't know about you, but I don't believe that the Oni wouldn't start a Cold War against the Tau Empire simply because that's what they would do. This organization is too suspicious and paranoid to believe that an alien species can actually be friendly and want an actual alliance. So, while a simple alliance is very much a possibility here, a Cold War scenario is much more probable here. And if that war went hot, as I described before, the UEG wouldn't endure. The Oni would be the end of the United Earth government. But that's a subject for a whole separate video, as I think I talked for long enough today. Before you leave, remember to like, comment, subscribe and ring-ding that bell. If you can, support me on Patreon. I would appreciate it very much. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed. Now, my dear viewers and listeners, remember, wherever you are, whatever you do, try to enjoy yourself while you can. I wish you most critical day. Ta-ta!